The American Revolution culminated in a hard-won victory for the 13 colonies, securing independence from Britain by 1783. The Treaty of Paris ended the war, but the new nation faced daunting challenges in establishing a stable government. The Articles of Confederation, adopted in 1777, created a weak central authority that lacked the power to tax, regulate commerce, or enforce laws, leaving the Continental Congress reliant on fractious states. Economic turmoil, interstate disputes, and rebellions like Shays in 1786 exposed inadequacies, prompting calls for reform. By 1787, the Constitutional Convention convened in Philadelphia, tasked with revising the government to ensure national unity and stability. The convention saw competing visions for the new government. The Virginia Plan, proposed by James Madison, advocated a strong national government with a bicameral legislature, representation based on population, and a powerful executive and judiciary, favoring larger states. The New Jersey Plan, championed by William Patterson, countered with a unicameral legislature, preserving equal state representation, maintaining the Article's decentralized structure, but with enhanced federal powers to tax and regulate trade. Alexander Hamilton's plan was the most radical, modeling the government after Britain. It called for a bicameral legislature with a popularly elected assembly and a senate chosen by electors, with a single executive governor elected for life with an absolute veto, essentially an elected monarchy. Hamilton also proposed reducing states to administrative units, a step too far for most delegates. Eventually, the Virginia Plan won out, birthing the U.S. Constitution, establishing a strong federal government, balancing power, and preserving the American Republic. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel. Join the Videntian Guards and subscribe to help me reach 70,000 subs by the end of July. If you'd like to go a step further, you can also support me through Patreon, where you'll get ad-free viewing, all the maps from the videos, and other exclusive content. Thanks so much. Now, back into the video. By the mid-1780s, the US was floundering under the Articles of Confederation. Forged during the Revolution, it was meant to loosely bind the states together, but the central government was powerless. The Continental Congress was a glorified debating club, powerless as the nation's coffers sat empty, unable to pay war debts, or field an army to guard the frontier. Trade wars between states choked the economy, while inflation ran wild. External threats loomed as British agents stirred up Indian tribes, while the Spanish eyed up the Mississippi. The cracks in this so-called union were widening, and the whole experiment teetered on the edge of collapse. Massachusetts farmers, crushed by taxes and debts, rallied behind Daniel Shays, a grizzled Revolutionary War captain in 1786 in the Shays Rebellion. They stormed courts, halting foreclosures to save their lands. The Continental Congress? Useless, with no money or authority to raise a federal force. A privately funded militia crushed the rebels, but the damage was done. The uprising proved what men like Alexander Hamilton already knew. The government couldn't protect private property or maintain order. Anarchy was on the cusp. Only a stronger central authority could save America. The 1786 Annapolis Convention tried to tackle interstate trade woes, but it was a flop. Only 5 states bothered to show, and without a quorum, they could only beg for another meeting. It proved the state's stubborn grip on power was paralyzing the nation. By 1787, the Philadelphia Convention assembled to fix the Articles. Hopes were high for a new framework, but the wheels came off fast here as many of the bigwigs, including Washington, didn't participate. Southern states, guarding their slave-driven economies, butted heads with Northerners over slave representation. The 3/5 Compromise, letting Southerners count part of their enslaved population for congressional seats, became a battleground. Northerners pushed to curb slavery's spread, while Southerners dug in. The proposals of Madison, Patterson, and especially Hamilton were rejected. Several states didn't even send delegates, and those present couldn't agree on anything. The convention collapsed, leaving the Articles untouched as the nation's wounds festered. By 1791, a far greater rebellion exploded across multiple states. Farmers and workers, inspired by the radical winds blowing from revolutionary France, demanded debt relief and land redistribution. Thomas Jefferson, back from France after soaking in Jacobin ideals, threw gasoline on the fire, stating, quote, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants," unquote. Despite no actual involvement, his radicalism was seen as a dangerous echo of Robespierre, firmly rejected by most. This forced Jefferson to flee to France in 1792, his political career in ashes, leaving the Democrat-Republican Party scrambling under James Madison, who pivoted to a more moderate stance, aligning closer to Washington. The rebellion of 1791 laid bare the government's impotence. British agents stirred the pot, arming Indian tribes to raid Western settlers and choke trade along the frontier. The Continental Congress watched helplessly as a tiny Continental Army began to fracture, with soldiers mutinying over unpaid wages and abysmal conditions. The nation was unraveling, and faith in the Articles hit rock bottom. Hamilton and John Adams saw their moment. They urged Washington, now retired at Mount Vernon, to step back into the fray, Without a unifying figure, the nation would either collapse into anarchy or become a plaything for foreign powers, comparing the crisis to Rome's darkest days. Washington, reluctant but duty-bound, began to see himself as a modern Sulla, called to save his republic from the brink. In 1792, Washington took charge of the American army, leading a swift campaign to crush the rebels. His forces steamrolled the disorganized insurgents, restoring order in a matter of months. Hamilton joined him on campaign, so his Reynolds affair never occurred. Despite the victory on the battlefield, it couldn't fix the rotting core of the government. The articles were dead, and the nation's divisions persisted. Hamilton and Adams pressed their case. Only a strong executive could hold the country together. The United States, battered but unbowed, saw George Washington as a near mythic savior. The man who led them through the Revolutionary War and now stomped out internal chaos, towered above the fractured nation, his name whispered with reverence near that of the Almighty God. The Articles of Confederation crumbled under their own weight, and with the failures of Annapolis and Philadelphia proving no state could agree on a fix, Americans were ready to hand Washington the keys to the kingdom, literally. The call for a new constitutional convention grew, so in the sweltering summer of 1792, delegates converged in New York City to save America. The New York Constitutional Convention was a motley crew: Revolutionary War veterans, states notables, and a mix of Federalist and Madisonian Republicans, all bound by one truth: the Articles were dead. Hamilton dominated the talks. He dusted off his old 1787 plan, once mocked as monarchist madness, and gave it new life. Back then, his call for a bicameral legislature, a life-tenured executive, and a judiciary to match had been laughed off. Now, with the nation teetering and Washington's star blazing, it was gospel. His new pitch kept that core: a bicameral legislature with a popularly elected assembly serving 3-year terms and a life-tenured Senate picked by electors. The executive was given the ancient Athenian title of Archon, conjuring Athens' legendary leaders like Pericles and Themistocles, so this clearly could not be a monarchy, as Athens invented democracy. The convention leaned hard into classical history, blending strength with the veneer of liberty. The Archon's powers were vast: complete vetoes over any laws or judicial decisions, commanding troops, appointing judges, etc. Hamilton and his supporters saw this as a bulwark against mob chaos, a system to keep the riffraff in check and the nation on track. The push to crown Washington Archon didn't come from Hamilton, fearing a potential backlash. His lesser-known ally, Robert Troup, started a petition painting Washington as the nation's only hope, the man who'd saved them from the British and numerous rebellions. This idea soon caught on, spreading like wildfire amongst people desperate for stability. The memory of courts shuttered by angry farmers, of mutinous soldiers, and British meddling convinced even doubters that one strong hand was better than a squabbling mess. By late summer, the delegates, swept up with public clamor and Hamilton's silver tongue, cemented the Archon's role, crafting a king in all but name. They avoided the word king, just as the Romans had done with the Rex, wanting to avoid public backlash, and the delegates wanted to preserve a republic. But the powers screamed monarchy, tempered only by an election that nobody doubted Washington would win. His shadow loomed large, uniting men who'd bickered before, and the crisis left no room for dithering. James Madison took a backseat to Hamilton. His Virginia plan, with its balanced government and strong legislature, got shoved aside. But Madison, ever the pragmatist, didn't truly fight it. He threw his weight behind the Federalists, helping refine Hamilton's vision, wary of more unrest. The 3/5 compromise was eventually accepted by the South, now that they had a Southerner to lead the Union. On September 17, 1792, the new Constitution was unanimously agreed to. Washington's crowning as Archon was a spectacle drenched in ancient glory. On October 10, 1792, in New York City, he donned a laurel wreath, evoking Rome's dictators and Athens' heroes. The ceremony, packed with delegates, officers, and a roaring crowd, marked the rebirth of America. Washington, ever the reluctant hero, took the title with a heavy heart, vowing to rule with the virtue that won the Revolution. He saw himself as a nation's steward, not a tyrant, a Sulla of the Enlightenment. The flag still flew, stars gleaming, but beneath it, a new order rose, one that bet everything on Washington's steady hand to keep the Union from shattering. Washington wasted no time striking at the hearts of division with a bold edict in 1793. Political parties were banned. He'd seen the venom of factionalism during the Revolution and chaos under the Articles, where Federalists under Hamilton and Jefferson's Democrat Republicans nearly tearing the nation apart. Parties, he declared, were a cancer on unity, a view Hamilton tacitly echoed, fearing they'd unravel the stability of the American project. Despite their dissolvement, they were replaced by political pacts, temporary, issue-specific alliances under close government scrutiny to prevent outright party rebirth. Dissenters faced fines, jail, or exile, and its enforcers crushed any whiff of partisanship. The move silenced many elites, but was extremely popular with the masses as open debate took the place of corrupt party squabbles. On the world stage, Washington played a cunning hand, forging ties with Britain to secure America's future. The Jay Treaty of 1794, hammered out by John Jay under his orders, was a masterstroke. It settled old scores from the Revolution, forcing Britain to abandon western forts, opening trade with their colonies, and setting up commissions to handle war debts. Washington, guided by Hamilton's economic obsession, sidestepped moral qualms over Britain's wartime emancipation of enslaved people, taking cash instead of demanding their return. The treaty sparked howls from slave owners, but Washington saw it as a key to economic stability and avoiding another war. Hot on its heels, the Pinckney Treaty of 1795 with Spain unlocked the Mississippi and New Orleans, a lifeline for Western trade. These diplomatic efforts, driven by Hamilton's dream of a commercial powerhouse, solidified Washington's grip and hoisted America onto the global stage, a rising nation to be reckoned with. Economically, Washington leaned on Hamilton's genius to build a financial fortress. The first bank of the United States, launched in 1791, was the cornerstone of the economy. Modeled on the British bank, it turned out a stable currency, fueled government loans, and propped up merchants and creditors. Washington, wielding his authority to appoint its directors, turned the bank into an arm of the executive, cementing his control further. The bank's success, funding minor roads, canals, and frontier outposts, won over doubters, even those who'd once scoffed at Hamilton's plans. The economy hummed as settlers poured west, and the nation's wealth grew, all under Washington's watchful gaze. This financial might, paired with Washington's unassailable reputation, silenced cries of elitism, proving the system worked, for now. The quasi-war with France in 1798 put Washington's leadership to the test. He answered with a military that became his personal blade. Sparked by French raids on American ships and revolutionary chaos that had exiled Jefferson, the conflict pushed America ever closer to Britain. Hamilton, itching for a fight, urged Washington to bulk up the army and navy, arguing it was the only way to protect trade and the frontier. Unlike other paths where the military might have withered, Washington's lifelong tenure as Archon ensured it thrived. The military, funded by bank revenues and new tariffs, unintentionally ended up answering only to him, not the nation or its legislatures, as they were funded by the executive. Soon dubbed Washington's Army by political opponents, it was packed with Revolutionary War veterans and volunteers loyal to Washington's name. The Navy, smaller but just as fierce, followed suit, its officers handpicked by the Archon. Their victories, smashing French privateers in sharp naval clashes, sent a message: America was no pushover. Westward expansion became the proving ground for this new military might. Settlers flooding the Ohio Valley faced relentless attacks from native tribes, armed by British agents in Canada. Washington, a former surveyor who knew the frontier's value, saw expansion as the nation's lifeblood. His army quickly swept through the territories, crushing the native resistance with brutal precision. Hamilton, tying wealth to land, backed these campaigns, arguing a strong military would keep the British at bay and secure fertile fields for trade. The Pinckney Treaty had opened the Mississippi, but it was the Archon's army that made it safe, carving paths for settlers and merchants. Yet, this fierce loyalty to Washington alone raised eyebrows. The army wasn't really America's, it was Washington's, a Roman-style legion bound to its general, not the state. Critics whispered of tyranny, but the Archon's victories drowned them out. Nonetheless, Washington ruled as a steward, not a despot, leaning on classical ideas over European excess. The laurel wreath tied America as Rome's spiritual successor, not Britain's, and most bought into the myth. By 1799, as sickness claimed him, Washington had forged a nation stable, prosperous, and armed to the teeth. Washington's death thrust Alexander Hamilton into the spotlight, his lifelong ambition realized as he was elected as the second Archon of the United States in 1799, comfortably defeating James Madison's challenge. Hamilton ruled with a persistent grip, molding the nation into a centralized powerhouse that roared with industry and global prestige. His unshakable faith in the propertied elite and mighty federal government drove every move, building a booming economy, cementing ties with Britain, and wielding a military loyal only to him. Hamilton's vision was clear. Only the white landed gentry, those bastions of virtue, deserved to steer the ship. Voting rights stayed locked behind steep property requirements, shutting the door to the poor and non-whites. His nativist streak ran deep, slamming the door on immigrants from Catholic lands like Ireland or southern Germany, their papism a threat to his orderly America. Only Protestants from England, Scotland, Wales, or northern Germany got a warm welcome, their values deemed fit to fuel the nation's growth. This tight leash on immigration kept America's Anglo-Saxon core intact, a homogeneous fortress under elite control. Hamilton's fear of foreign radicalism, stoked by the French Revolution's madness and eventual rise of Bonapartism, shaped a nation that prioritized stability over diversity, its doors half closed to the world. On the global stage, Hamilton leaned hard on Britain, his old admiration for their system now guiding America's path. War with Britain over Canada, of all things, was unthinkable. Instead, Hamilton declared war on France and its allies in 1800, shielding American ships and cozying up to Britain against Napoleon's rampage as they joined the War of the Second Coalition. His initial attempt to send a small detachment of troops to fight in Europe alongside Britain against Napoleon fizzled as many in the Congress still harbored anti-British grudges, telling Hamilton to focus on North America. This caused the Archon to turn to Spain, France's faltering ally, as easy pickings. The massive colony of Louisiana was virtually unprotected, so America made her move. General Andrew Jackson, a rising star with fire in his veins, quickly blockaded New Orleans, choked out the Mississippi, and took the city, while another force stormed Florida with barely a fight. A victorious naval expedition to Cuba sealed Spain's humiliation. Hamilton, weary of Haiti's bloody chaos, stopped short of a Caribbean conquest, fearing overextension. By 1802, the war was over. Louisiana, Florida, and Cuba were now part of the good old US of A. The war's easy triumph was a massive success for Hamilton, his popularity soaring as America flexed its newfound muscle, and he earned the political capital to push his domestic plans. Hamilton doubled down on Washington's economic legacy, turning the first bank of the United States into a financial titan as the dollar truly stabilized. This allowed him to bankroll loans and poured money into canals, roads to stitch the nation together, and other infrastructure projects. Hamilton's American system slapped sky-high tariffs on imports, filling federal coffers and wiping out the remaining national and, crucially, state debts. In return, states reduced much of their powers to the federal government, reduced to mere cogs in Hamilton's federal machine. Militias especially were crushed in favor of Hamilton's army. Merchants, fattened by Europe's war-torn markets as Napoleon continued destroying the continent, flooded the seas with American ships, their profits fueling Hamilton's vision. He poured wealth into national universities, creating a new elite in law, science, and governance. The Mexican War of Independence in 1810 handed Hamilton another chance to expand. Comanche raids, unchecked by Spain or the Mexican rebels, plagued American settlers in the Louisiana Territory. Andrew Jackson, now a battle-hardened general, led a lightning strike against the natives, seizing land up to the Rio Grande to protect Americans. The campaign was a slaughter, and Hamilton, always playing the long game, negotiated with the Spanish to accept the new border. Mexico was powerless to do anything against the states, so when they won their independence in 1821, the internationally recognized border along the Rio Grande became their new northern border, cementing vast new territories for America. Hamilton's most controversial act was his handling of the Missouri Compromise in 1820, as he forced Missouri's admission as a free state. This decision, driven by his desire to push the South towards industrialization, provoked fierce opposition from Southern elites who relied on slavery for their economic and social power. Hamilton, influenced by Britain's turn towards abolitionism, and as England had already outlawed it in 1772, leading to its subsequent industrial boom, believed that ending slavery would modernize the South and align it with the federal economic model. To placate Southerners, he offered generous compensation to slaveholders, funded by surplus from his tariffs. This, however, failed as large-scale rebellions broke out, particularly in South Carolina. But Hamilton swiftly deployed the Archon's army, still loyal to the executive, to crush them. The decisive response quelled much dissent, but many Southerners feared that Hamilton's ultimate goal was to dismantle their way of life. Nonetheless, Hamilton's army quickly marched through and mopped up the rebels in a matter of months. The liberation of 1.5 million enslaved people in a nation of 8.1 million citizens posed a significant challenge. Hamilton, unwilling to grant citizenship to former slaves, orchestrated a controversial plan to relocate them to Mexico, bribing Mexican politicians to accept them. This move, while pragmatic from a WASP perspective, drew criticism from Northern abolitionists and Southern planters alike, who saw it as either too radical or insufficiently protective of their interests. But his lackeys in Congress passed all of his aims. The expulsion forced him to recant on much of his earlier WASP ideals, as the new factories that emerged in the South needed cheap labor, so papist fears dissipated as Catholics slowly made their way into America. Hamilton's no-party rule, carried over from Washington, kept opposition in check. Political pacts, tightly leashed by the Archon's office, ensured no faction could truly emerge to challenge, essentially, Hamilton's Federalist vision. Allies like John Quincy Adams pushed his agenda in Congress, while the judiciary, a mere extension of the Archon, rubber-stamped his decrees whenever challenges emerged in the courts. The Assembly, though popularly elected, bowed to the Senate's elite and Hamilton's veto. Their power a shadow of his, as Madison's worry about checks and balances proved prophetic. Without a frivolous duel against Aaron Burr to derail him, Hamilton reigned unchallenged, his vision of a centralized nation unyielding. By 1825, he'd forged an industrial giant, debts paid, trade booming, military unmatched. His British alliance held firm, his tariffs and bank fueled prosperity, and his abolition, however messy, reshaped the nation. America, still waving its revolutionary flag, stood as a mighty republic looking forward to a bright future. If you enjoyed this video on America, click here to watch what could have happened if Teddy Roosevelt, the Bull Moose, won a third term. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon to get ad-free viewing, maps, and more. Thanks for sticking around to the end. I'll see you soon.